It's a sweltering summer day in New York City in 1894, a city that feels like it's bursting at the seams. Crowds throng the streets, skyscrapers claw towards the sky, and every day immigrants pour through Ellis Island, seeking their piece of the American dream. You just got off work and are headed to 1155 Broadway. All week long, the newspapers have been trumpeting Edison's newest technological marvel, a moving picture contraption. Here, for just 25 cents, anybody, from the newly arrived immigrant to the wealthy businessman, can witness a miracle. So say the papers. Finally, you get your chance. You walk up to one of the odd-looking machines and drop a few coins into the slot. Bending over, you place your face down onto a binocular-looking portal and stare into darkness. The machine starts to whir, and suddenly, you see clear as day photographs, but moving. Photographic images are shifting, changing, bursting with life. Over the next few minutes, you witness 5 short moving photographs, each just seconds long. A man sneezes, dancers spin, mundane moments transformed into mesmerizing spectacles, real people captured and replaying endlessly in this mechanical marvel. Suddenly, the whirring stops. All you see is black. Your time's up. Lightheaded and heart racing, you stumble outside into the sweltering heat, back into a city that itself seems to whir like a machine, moving at an impossible pace. What you've just experienced is that same magic that moviegoers will feel for the next century and beyond. That disorientation of being transported somewhere else, of having time suspended while completely absorbed in another world. You don't know it yet, but you've just witnessed the birth of the movies. This simple novelty, born as a spectacle, will come to dominate the coming century as one of the most powerful storytelling mediums the world has ever known. For movies to be born, first we needed photography, a revolution in capturing reality. In the 1820s, Joseph Niepce created the first crude photographs. His partner, Louis Daguerre, perfected the process, and by the 1840s, photography had become a cultural phenomenon. The second piece of the puzzle was something called persistence of vision, a principle discovered by British scientist Peter Mark Roget in 1824. Here's how it works. When you see an object, that image lingers on your retina for a split second after it's gone. Show your brain a series of still images fast enough and they blur together, creating the illusion of motion. Remember those flip books you might have had as a kid? The faster you flip the pages, the more the drawing comes to life. Slow it down and you see the individual images. That's persistence of vision at work. In 1832, Belgian physicist Joseph Plateau turned this discovery into entertainment with the phenactoscope, a spinning disc with sequential drawings and precisely cut slits. You could spin the disc, and suddenly the drawings danced to life. These fanciful contraptions became popular toys, like the zoetrope, sold by Milton Bradley in the 1860s. Watching these spinning discs still gives a sense of hypnotism. It's as if our minds want to fill in the gaps, that we allow the illusion to convince us that the depiction is really moving. The eager complicity of our minds in creating this illusion gives a hint of the coming magic of movies. Photography, persistence of vision, toys with spinning discs, all of the puzzle pieces needed for inventing the motion picture were there, but it would take a gambler's bet to bring them all together. One of the great mysteries of the time was how animals actually moved. Today, this may seem quaint, but in the past, there was no way to observe movements too quick for the naked eye. How exactly did a horse gallop? Did all four hooves leave the ground at once? Nobody knew for certain. Edward Muybridge, a photographer, was hired by Leland Stanford, a former governor, to settle this question once and for all. Stanford, a horse breeder, had made a bet that a horse did lift all four hooves off the ground at full gallop, and he was determined to prove it. But how do you photograph something moving faster than the eye can see? Muybridge had an audacious plan. In 1877, he constructed an elaborate setup along a specially built racetrack. A dozen cameras positioned precisely along the track, each one tripwired and ready to fire. Thundering down the track, Stanford's horse triggered each camera's shutter, capturing split-second photographs of the galloping horse. Muybridge's technique was a gamble, but it paid off spectacularly. Stanford won his bet. But in the process, something much more important happened. Muybridge had made a breakthrough in the development of the movies. When he mounted the sequence of photos on a rotating disc and projected them through a lantern, he produced a kind of moving picture of a horse at full gallop. But is this the first motion picture? It's a little hard to say. You get the sensation of motion, but you can also see the remnants of still photographs. The motion isn't smooth because Muybridge's cameras could only capture about 8 photographs per second, not quite fast enough for fluid motion. The standard for movies would eventually become 24 photographs per second, or what we now call frames per second. 1 year later, French scientist Etienne Jules Marais saw Muybridge's galloping horse photographs in a scientific journal and was fascinated. Inspired by those camera sequences, in 1882, Marais developed a photographic gun capable of taking 12 photographs per second, the first crude movie camera. He captured everything from cats landing on their feet to human muscle movement, creating what he and Muybridge called chronophotography. The groundbreaking work of Muybridge and Marais excited inventors worldwide. Their discoveries spread, and the race to perfect the motion picture intensified on both sides of the Atlantic. Some inventors would gain fame and bring the motion picture to the masses. Others would vanish into history. Foreshadowing the medium, movies were born in tragedy and scandal. In England, a French inventor named Louis Le Prince was quietly working on his own single-lens motion picture camera using continuous film. On October 14, 1888, Le Prince shot this brief clip at roughly 7 frames per second, titled Roundhay Garden Scene. At just 1.7 seconds long, many film scholars consider this to be the oldest surviving motion picture. Patent in hand, Le Prince was ready to showcase his breakthrough to the world. In 1890, he planned a public exhibition in New York City that could have changed everything. But first, he traveled to France to visit his brother in Dijon. After boarding a train to Paris, Louis Le Prince vanished without a trace. His body was never found. Some speculate that he was murdered by rivals who coveted his new invention. Others believe he took his own life. Meanwhile, back in the United States, Thomas Edison was closely following Muybridge and Marai's experiments. Edison was a prolific tinkerer, but more than anything, he was a businessman who knew how to turn inventions into gold. Often called America's greatest inventor, many of his inventions were actually refinements of other people's ideas, perfected by his large staff of engineers whose work he frequently claimed as his own. Edison quickly recognized the financial potential of motion pictures. Around 1890, his assistant, William Dixon, developed the kinetograph, the first fully functional motion picture camera. But Edison faced a crucial question: how do you make money from moving pictures? His answer was the kinetoscope, a peep-show viewer that premiered at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. Insert a coin, peer into the box, watch a brief moving picture. These early films were just seconds long: a woman dancing, a strong man flexing, a baby's bath, boxing cats. To produce these films, Edison built the world's first film studio, the Black Maria, where he and his team ultimately created over 1,200 short films. People were fascinated. Within a year, kinetoscope parlors had spread nationwide. But the kinetoscope had a fundamental limitation. It was a solitary experience. What if moving pictures could be projected for people to enjoy together? Across the Atlantic, two French brothers worked to make watching movies social. Auguste and Louis Lumière invented the cinematograph, a lightweight camera that could also project films. On December 28, 1895, they held the first public screening in Paris for 40 paying guests. They screened 10 short films: workers leaving a factory, a baby being fed, a train arriving at a station. Simple scenes, yet enthralling. According to legend, the audience jumped out of their chairs when the oncoming train seemed to barrel towards them. That night marked the true birth of cinema. Not just moving pictures, but a shared experience. Motion pictures projected for the thrill of an audience. So, who invented the movies? No one single person. The medium emerged from borrowed ideas, copied techniques, and yes, stolen inventions. But by the mid-1890s, the pieces had finally assembled into something extraordinary. And appropriately, both France and the United States would remain influential in cinema's evolution for generations to come. Unlike early newspapers, which initially appealed to the wealthy elite, movies found their largest audience among the poor and the working class, especially the millions of immigrants flooding into America's industrial cities. These newcomers, working long hours in factories, flocked to this new form of escape that was cheap, accessible, and most importantly, didn't require a word of English. Moving pictures, shortened to just movies by the 1910s, were shown in small theaters called Nickelodeons, named for the price most working people could afford, a nickel. Owned mostly by immigrant entrepreneurs, these theaters showed films that were about 15 to 20 minutes in length. By 1909, nearly 10,000 Nickelodeons dotted American cities and towns. They flourished until about 1915, when they were replaced by larger, more ornate movie palaces. Early movies had a unifying appeal to the masses: accessibility. Newspapers of the time demanded literacy and most required English fluency. Movies demanded neither. These silent films cut across language barriers, letting a Polish steelworker, Italian seamstress, and German baker all share the same entertainment. But there was nothing really silent about the movie experience. Packed into cramped theaters, audiences watched films accompanied by live piano, singers, and even sound effects performed right there in the theater. It was a raucous, thrilling social experience. In an era of deep ethnic divisions and rapid social change, movies became a kind of democratic mass medium, entertainment for the people, at a price most could afford. Thomas Edison saw the commercial possibilities of movies and wanted total control. He forced competitors to license his cameras, threatened distributors who worked with rivals, and backed up these tactics with an arsenal of legal patents. Edison was a visionary, but he had a dark side. He claimed credit for others' work and used lawsuits to crush competition, even going so far as to proclaim himself to be the father of the motion picture. In 1908, Edison formed the Motion Picture Patents Company, known as the Trust, and gained a complete monopoly over American film production. Want to make or distribute a movie? You had to pay Edison. Filmmakers had other plans. As Edison's grip tightened, they began fleeing the East Coast for the West, landing mostly in Los Angeles, where Edison's patents were harder to enforce. According to lore, filmmakers working in dubious legal circumstances liked being close to the border. If law enforcement came to enforce Edison's patents, filmmakers could quickly escape to Mexico. While Los Angeles offered something far more valuable than legal refuge: sunshine, and lots of it. Early cameras needed bright, natural light, and Southern California provided year-round outdoor shooting, unlike the dreary Northeast. Aspiring filmmakers and studios settled in and around the Hollywood neighborhood, whose name would become synonymous with American movie making. Just as the West Coast became America's filmmaking capital, Edison's empire crumbled. In 1915, a federal court ruled that his motion picture patents company was an illegal monopoly under the Sherman Antitrust Act and ordered it broken up. With Edison's trust gone, creativity flourished. Yet, the profit-making potential of the movies would invite new systems of control in the coming decades, with the coming rise of powerful movie moguls in Hollywood studios. From their invention in the 1890s to their establishment as an art form in the 1910s, movies progressed rapidly. But what were these early films actually like? Black and white, silent, and brief, the earliest movies were often just slice-of-life cinema, showing interesting recordings of real life. They had no stories, no plots, no characters, they were just captured moments. There were a few early experiments with storytelling. In 1896, a young French secretary named Alice Guy Blanchet created La Fée du Chou, or The Cabbage Fairy, often credited as the first narrative film. At just 20 years old, she became cinema's first female filmmaker. Her brief fairy tale about babies being born from cabbages planted the seeds of the storytelling potential of the movies. Building on these early experiments with narrative film, French magician Georges Méliès would take cinematic storytelling to spectacular new heights. Using his background in stagecraft, Méliès created films with compelling narratives and pioneered editing techniques that transformed movies from novelty into art. Let's take a look at Méliès' 1902 film, A Trip to the Moon, one of cinema's earliest masterpieces. In his 14-minute-long film, Méliès tells the fantastic tale of an expedition to the moon. Wizards built a cannon to shoot themselves into the moon, quite literally, giving us one of the most iconic scenes of early cinema. With no dialogue, characters made exaggerated gestures, giving silent films their distinctive theatrical feel. Remember, this was 1902, 60 years before the actual moon landing. The idea of visiting the moon was pure fantasy, letting Méliès play with audiences' imagination. Although shot like all early films in black and white, this colorized version was painstakingly hand-tinted with paint, over 12,000 individual frames. Unlike early Edison films, Trip to the Moon has a complete narrative. Characters embark on an adventure, face danger, and return home triumphant. There are rudimentary visual effects. By featuring space travel and alien life, Méliès created the first science fiction, or sci-fi, movie, launching a genre that remains popular today. Despite his many innovations, Méliès maintained a fixed camera point of view, placing the camera as if it was in the best seat in a theater. The camera never moved, creating a two-dimensional, stage-like quality. Inspired by Méliès, American filmmaker Edwin S. Porter became one of the first to bring cinematic storytelling to America. Working for Edison's company, Porter filmed The Great Train Robbery in 1903, a landmark of American early film. Porter revolutionized filmmaking by shooting on location and moving his camera to give viewers exciting new perspectives, like placing it on top of a moving train. This gave his film a three-dimensional quality that truly placed viewers into a scene. Porter achieved another historic first. Watch carefully here. He pivots his camera mid-scene, following the robbers as they run from the train into the woods. This technique, later called a camera pan, freed cinema from the fixed perspective of theater. Porter allowed the camera to rove about, making the audience part of the movie. Porter saved his biggest surprise for last. After the happy ending, one bandit appears in close-up, stares directly at the audience, raises his gun, and fires. Legend claims some viewers screamed or fainted. Almost a century later, Martin Scorsese paid homage to this moment in the ending of his film, Goodfellas. Méliès and Blanchet gave movies their first gift, narrative. Porter delivered the second, freedom of camera movement. Together, these pioneers elevated movie making from novelty to craft, but the medium was still waiting for its first true artist, someone who would take narrative and camera movement and forge them into the grand Hollywood movie-making experience. D.W. Griffith, an American filmmaker, built on earlier innovations to forge movies into the sweeping, dramatic storytelling spectacle that we know today. Despite working over a century ago, Griffith mastered the core structure of epic filmmaking, bringing movies from novelty to powerful storytelling. In 1915, Griffith's film, Birth of a Nation, a technological masterpiece and moral catastrophe, took the country by storm. Based on a book called The Klansman, it told a heroic story of the Ku Klux Klan, transforming America's most notorious white supremacist organization into romantic heroes. The immense popularity of Griffith's overtly racist film and its technological mastery would showcase how movies quickly became a fulcrum point for culture, politics, and historical imagination. Birth of a Nation set the template for spectacular Hollywood movies, selling out theaters coast to coast. Griffith's film was storytelling on a scale that only the movies could achieve. With massive battle scenes and dramatic close-ups, his film ran almost 3 hours, when most movies were only about 15 minutes. D.W. Griffith didn't invent every cinematic trick, but he combined them into Hollywood's storytelling formula. Most crucially, he mastered parallel editing, cross-cutting between simultaneous settings to build suspense. He'd show riders galloping to rescue, cut to a family under threat, cut back to riders getting closer, and then back to the escalating danger. Audiences would grip their seats, waiting to see which thread would resolve first. This technique let Griffith blend epic spectacle with intimate emotion, creating the basic structure of a Hollywood movie, a template that still defines cinema today. But his brilliance served a poisonous purpose. Birth of a Nation portrayed enslaved people as happy under slavery, depicted black men as rapists and as threats to white women, and presented the KKK as noble protectors. In a particularly racist scene, Griffith employs his classic parallel editing technique, showing a freed slave stalking a young white girl up a hill and then leading to her suicide. In the story, her vengeful brother goes on to found the Klan in order to protect Southern whites from the threat of freed black people. Birth of a Nation revealed that movies are inherently ideological. Though ostensibly about Reconstruction 50 years earlier, it resonated with 1915 audiences anxious about mass immigration, greater racial and ethnic diversity, and social change. The film became a massive commercial success, earning millions and playing nationwide. More dangerously, it helped revive the KKK, which had been largely dormant since Reconstruction. After the film's release, Klan membership surged across the country, peaking at over 2 million members. Unsurprisingly, Black Americans felt attacked by Griffith's film. The NAACP organized protests, and the small handful of Black-owned newspapers called the film dangerous and bigoted. But in the 1910s, Black Americans had virtually no voice in the public mainstream. Birth of a Nation was heralded as a success by the nation's white-owned papers. It was even screened at the White House. Griffith's film and its ability to inspire the rebirth of America's most violent white supremacist organization spoke to the growing power of the big screen and its ability to shape public beliefs. Soon, people came to realize that whoever controlled the medium of film would have the power to shape the stories we all use to understand our world. Those with access to cameras, large budgets, and theaters shape cultural narratives. Those without that access, like Black Americans and other minorities in 1915, were essentially powerless to counter false and dangerous stories told about them in movies. Birth of a Nation ultimately showed how cinematic artistry and propaganda could work hand in hand, and how movies could be used as a weapon in struggles over culture justice, and the meaning of America. Their names weren't in the credits. They had no public identity. Yet, audiences couldn't help their curiosity. Who were these beautiful, fascinating people whose glowing faces lit up dark theaters? Projected high above audiences onto the big screen, movie actors appeared larger than life, an almost supernatural force. In live theater, performers were seen at a distance, figures on a faraway stage. But movies brought the audience face to face with strangers. Every expression, every emotion, a new kind of intimacy. Initially, studios wanted to keep actors anonymous and left their names out of the credits. They were, after all, just the hired help, not important like a director or writer. This was also a deliberate tactic to suppress wages. The studios knew that with fame, actors could demand higher pay. But this arrangement couldn't last. A young, attractive actress who appeared in dozens of films for Biograph Studios started receiving hundreds of adoring letters. But without her name in the credits, fans didn't know how to address her, and as her fame grew, she came to be known simply as Biograph Girl. Her name was Florence Lawrence. Despite the public's growing fascination, Biograph Studios refused to publicly credit her name, and Carl Laemmle, a brash young producer at a competing studio, saw a golden opportunity. To promote his new studio, Independent Motion Picture Company, he concocted one of the earliest publicity stunts in Hollywood history. First, he signed Lawrence away from Biograph with a better paying contract and public name recognition. Next, he leaked a false story to newspapers that Lawrence, aka Biograph Girl, had died in a streetcar accident in St. Louis. News of her supposed death pulled on the public's growing fascination, and after days of publicity, Laemmle published a correction titled "We Nail a Lie," declaring that Biograph Girl, Florence Lawrence, was actually alive and well, and most importantly, would be starring in his new IMP film, The Broken Oath. When Lawrence appeared in person in St. Louis to promote the film, she was reportedly mobbed by fans who tore buttons from her coat. America had its first movie star. After the Biograph Girl stunt, studios realized that they could make enormous profits by building personalities around actors, and from that point on, actor names and credits became standard practice. By the late 1910s, the names of famous movie stars dominated headlines. Mary Pickford was crowned America's sweetheart, Francis X. Bushman, the handsomest man in the world, and Douglas Fairbanks, the king of Hollywood. The movies had created something unprecedented, a new form of interest and intimacy that audiences felt for performers, and with it, a new kind of power that would reshape American culture forever. Like so many of the hired help of Hollywood, Florence Lawrence's story ends in tragedy. By the 1930s, her star had burnt out. Her fortune was spent, and she got by as an uncredited extra working for MGM Studios. Facing obscurity and ill health, she took her own life in 1938. Florence Lawrence, Biograph Girl, the first movie star, was laid to rest in the Hollywood Forever Cemetery. The 1920s made the movies part of everyday life. Grand movie palaces replaced cramped Nickelodeons, elevating moviegoing from cheap thrill to cultural ritual. By decade's end, 70% of Americans would go out to the movies at least once a week. That's 90 million people that were filling theaters coast to coast. What made movies so universally appealing? They remained mostly silent through the decade, relying on gesture, music, and minimal text. This accessibility proved crucial for the millions of immigrants settling into American life. Movies were affordable, they were social, and they were everywhere. And it was immigrants, particularly Jewish entrepreneurs, who helped build America's grand movie industry. Jewish Americans faced many barriers in the 1920s. Anti-Semitism blocked them from prestigious universities, Jews were barred from many professions and social clubs. But Hollywood was different. A new industry way out on the West Coast, free from the rigid hierarchies and prejudices of the Eastern establishment. Many Jewish families also had experience in the garment and theater businesses, making the transition to the show business of Hollywood a natural fit. After the government broke up Edison's trust in 1915, this new generation of Jewish businessmen saw opportunity. They founded and co-founded many of the studios that became Hollywood's foundation: Universal Pictures, Paramount, Warner Brothers, Columbia, and MGM. There was a certain kind of irony to it all. Jewish immigrants who were largely kept out of the American elite, who were treated as suspicious outsiders, these studio founders would create one of the greatest cultural machines for mass entertainment in the 20th century, Hollywood. Their movies promoted the ideals of America. The stories they put on screen portrayed an idealized vision of American culture and democracy seen around the globe, even if that ideal was not always in practice at home. Have you ever wondered why Hollywood dominates global cinema? Part of the answer lies buried in the trenches of World War I. Movie making had developed at about the same time in Europe and America, but when war erupted in 1914, much of the European film industry shut down as entire economies shifted to the war effort. The devastation was total. Mechanized warfare brought carnage and destruction on an unimaginable scale. Then, in the final year of war, 1918, the Spanish flu raged across the globe, killing millions more people, including hundreds of thousands of Americans. A world war and a global pandemic left much of the world hunkered down and desperate for relief. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, American studios had kept filming. When the guns of war finally fell silent and the dark clouds of sickness and pandemic lifted, Hollywood stood ready to offer what people craved: escape into the dream world of the movies. The glamour, hedonism, and extravagance of American cinema were the perfect antidote to a generation exhausted from war and mass death. In the decade that followed, Hollywood flooded global markets, including a devastated Europe, with hundreds of high-quality, star-driven films, firmly establishing the United States as the world's movie-making capital. In darkened theaters around the country and around the world, audiences sought different forms of escape. Romantic films offered intoxicating fantasy. Rudolph Valentino smoldered in The Sheik and The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. Known as the Latin Lover, when Valentino tragically died of appendicitis at the young age of 31, his devastated fans mobbed his funeral procession as it passed through New York City. Greta Garbo arrived from Sweden speaking no English, but her sensuality and worldly characters pushed the limits of eroticism in film, becoming one of Hollywood's first sex symbols. When she teamed up with John Gilbert, nicknamed the Great Lover in Flesh and the Devil, their chemistry was so intense that rumors of real romance sent box office receipts soaring. Studios quickly learned the value of selling and at times manufacturing romantic fantasy, both on and off screen. Hollywood, stronger than ever after the war, looked to flex its grand global ambitions through spectacular and spectacularly expensive historical epics. Ben-Hur, A Tale of the Christ, deployed thousands of extras and used real chariots crashing at breakneck speed for its legendary chariot race, costing more than most studios' entire annual budgets. Films like The Ten Commandments or The Thief of Baghdad featured massive sets and enormous casts, proving that only Hollywood could resurrect ancient civilizations or part the Red Sea. And studios fought to outdo each other in scale and ambition as they sought status and prestige. Movies weren't all about epic histories or romantic escape. Horror films of the era confronted and explored the deeper traumas of the era. Lon Chaney, nicknamed the Man of 1,000 Faces, created the era's most resonant monsters through incredible makeup artistry. His disfigured, sympathetic outcasts, like Quasimodo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, pulled on audiences' heartstrings. He was a frightful character, made ever more so by the huge rubber harness that Chaney wore for the hump. But Chaney's emotional portrayal of Quasimodo let audiences feel his real suffering, his isolation, what it felt like to be shunned by society. It was a powerful message of empathy in a society which struggled to reintegrate millions of war veterans who were returning home with missing limbs, facial disfigurement, and psychological trauma. But it was across the Atlantic, in Germany, still reeling from a devastating loss in World War I, where movies took a darkly creative turn. German expressionist filmmakers, most of them veterans, explored the leftover terror and trauma of war. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari by Robert Wiene used jagged, angular sets and unnatural shadows that didn't just create an eerie atmosphere, they visualized mental landscapes of trauma, showing what shattered minds looked like from the inside. These distorted perspectives reflected the psychological damage of a generation that had witnessed so-called civilized nations tear each other apart with industrial efficiency. Max Schreck as Count Orlok haunted audiences in 1922's Nosferatu, created by F.W. Murnau. Both Schreck and Murnau, like so many Germans of their generation, had fought in the war, and their experience gave the film a visceral quality, as they depicted a fictional German town, Weisberg, slowly overtaken by rats, disease, and of course, the undead vampire Orlok, images that would have resonated powerfully with viewers who had lived through pandemic and war. Perhaps the greatest cinematic masterpiece of the silent era was also born from these war-weary German expressionists, Fritz Lang's science fiction epic, Metropolis. Lang depicts a dystopian futuristic city divided between a wealthy upper class living in luxury and a downtrodden working class toiling in the dark depths of the city below to power its machines. The city's ruler conscripts a mad scientist to build a machine human that impersonates Maria, a woman who is the spiritual leader of the workers, so as to dupe them, but instead, this machine woman leads to chaos, a chilling view of the dangers of technology in a society rife with inequality, although the film ends with a conciliatory and hopeful message. A century later, cinema continues to grapple with our technological fears and aspirations. Will technology liberate human potential or subjugate it? For a decade grappling with so much change, upheaval, and anxiety, there was one genre that truly came to define the 1920s: comedy. The gags might have been silent, but theaters were full of laughter. Physical humor transcended language barriers, and it helped ease ethnic tensions. It made light of dark times and poked fun at the powerful. Building on the chaotic slapstick humor of the 1910s Keystone Cops, the decade brought legendary comedians like Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd, and Mabel Normand, one of the first major female comedy stars. These performers created relatable characters whose everyday situations spiraled into spectacular chaos. Lloyd's Safety Last featured him dangling from a clock tower in one of cinema's most memorable scenes, all driven by the desire to impress a girl. But among all these comedy legends, among the most popular genre in film, there is one singular name that transcends the era: Charlie Chaplin, cinema's first global superstar. Inspired by Max Sennett's Keystone Cops, where he began his career, Chaplin used expressive body language and pantomime to create an iconic style of comedy that spoke to audiences worldwide. Chaplin's most beloved recurring character, the Tramp, appealed to the everyman, dressed in an ill-fitting coat, oversized trousers, floppy shoes, and a bowler hat. As the Tramp, Chaplin stumbled through misfortune and bad luck, using cleverness and wit to survive while delivering near-constant laughs through impeccably timed gags that maximized physical comedy's impact, without needing to utter a word. As his fame grew, Chaplin joined Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford to found United Artists, their own distribution company. This independence gave Chaplin unprecedented creative control, allowing him to infuse social and political commentary into his later comedies like Modern Times and The Great Dictator. In his brilliantly funny Modern Times, the Tramp struggles with the dehumanizing effects of industrialization. Through relentless physical gags, Chaplin playfully tries to resist becoming yet another cog in the wheel of industry, satirizing the pressures of toiling workers in the factory while the boss played games up in the executive suite. In true Chaplin style, he brings life to the metaphor, quite literally becoming a human cog trapped in the wheel of industry. Chaplin would go on to mock the authoritarianism of Adolf Hitler as the Great Dictator, a bold and direct attack on fascism when Hitler still had many American admirers. Chaplin's use of comedy to make serious political critique would eventually put a target on his back. During the post-war Red Scare, Chaplin, originally born in London, was falsely accused of being a communist, had his visa revoked, and was barred from the United States. As Chaplin found out, freedom of expression in film is, and has always been, a struggle. Perhaps no group understood the limitations on freedom of expression as did African American filmmakers, who are almost entirely shut out of the movie business. Unwelcome in Hollywood, a small group of aspiring black filmmakers had to create their own studios. Among them, Oscar Micheaux emerged as the most prolific, producing over 44 films as America's first major African American feature filmmaker. His 1920 film, Within Our Gates, directly confronted the racial violence that Hollywood ignored. It was Micheaux's rebuttal of D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation. The film follows Sylvia, a young black woman raising funds for a rural school and exposing the brutal realities of racism, economic exploitation, prejudice, and violence. In the most harrowing sequence, her adopted parents are falsely accused and lynched by a white mob, an extremely stark contrast to the romanticized view of the KKK in Griffith's work. Locked out of Hollywood's marketing machine, to even show a film like this required extraordinary determination. A newspaper advertisement for Within Our Gates gives a sense of the barriers that Micheaux faced. It reads, "Special notice. Due to the peculiar nature of this picture, no theater could be secured that would exhibit it. Therefore, we are forced to do the next best thing and use our own building." Micheaux had to use his own facilities because no theater would show a film telling the truth about white racial violence in the 1920s. Micheaux's story is exceptional, but also proves the rule. It would be another 60 years before black filmmakers gained real access to American cinema. The Roaring '20s were cinema's defining decade. Movies stood alone as the dominant form of mass entertainment. In a century that started with war and misery, movie theaters became sanctuaries where people, sitting in the dark with others, could process the anxieties and hopes of the time. But the innovative medium was restless, and by the end of the decade, it had one grand innovation to make. For over 20 years, filmmakers had mastered storytelling without sound. Visual cues stood for what couldn't be heard. A gunshot could be shown with the sudden flight of birds, the roar of an incoming train, a bellowing smokestack. The audience's imagination did the rest. Songs, played by piano or even on record, could be loosely synchronized to film, but spoken dialogue and sound effects remained elusive. With radio starting to spread, the silence of movies grew deafening. On October 6, 1927, crowds lined up outside Warner Brothers' flagship theater in New York City. Billboards had beckoned people for weeks with something completely new to come see and hear the jazz singer. The excitement was palpable. The jazz singer followed a young Jewish man, played by Al Jolson, who dreams of becoming a jazz singer, defying his father's more traditional wishes. The film begins like any other silent film, with intertitle cards and synchronized songs. Then, without warning, about 20 minutes into the film, Jolson spoke the words that would change cinema forever.
Wait a minute, you ain't heard nothing yet. Wait a minute, I tell you ain't heard nothing. You want to hear Toot Toot Tootsie? All right, hold on. No, listen, play Toot Toot Tootsie, 3 choruses, you understand? And the 3rd chorus, I whistle. Now give it to him hard and heavy. Go right ahead. Toot Toot Tootsie, goodbye. Toot Toot Tootsie, don't cry.
The audience was awestruck. The rest of the film cleverly alternated between sound and silence. In an emotional scene where Jolson's father discovers him playing forbidden jazz music, the father shouts,
Nothing but.
The film then returns to using title cards. The father's shocked silence represented decades of silent cinema suddenly confronted with this talking revolution. The film's plot cleverly embodied the tension between past and future, the past of silent movies giving way to the future of sound. Audiences walked out of The Jazz Singer buzzing at the thrill of having experienced a historic moment in cinema. The silent era was over. But what they didn't know, or couldn't know, was that the golden age of Hollywood had only just begun.